This is the Inclusion Conversation. I'm your host, Grace Young Foster, founder and CEO of the Inclusion Initiative. I'm an adoptee, I'm a foster care alum, and I'm passionate about elevating our communities. It's time we're included and visible in the conversations about work, careers, and just life. Let's be visible and let's be loud. Join me now. Hey, welcome everyone to the Inclusion Conversation. Thrilled to have a friend on the show today, Issac Etter. We met, when I first started launching the Inclusion Initiative and our professional platform. You've been involved with the community pretty much since the beginning and a supporter and advocate. I really appreciate you being there for us and helping us build along the way. So welcome.
Yeah,
thanks for joining us.
I'm happy to be here and happy to support your work.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's really great to have you as back again as a guest speaker. Yeah. And for those of you who don't know Issac very well, I just want to share a little bit about him before we dive into our conversation. So Issac Etter is an adoptee and social entrepreneur who was transracially adopted at the age of 2. He founded Identity, a startup focused on helping adoptive and foster families thrive. At Identity, Issac is working on reimagining post-placement support for adoptive and foster families. Very critical. Thank you for doing that work, Issac. And he uses his story and deep passion for adoption and foster care education to bring relevant, quality, and diverse resources to adoptive and foster families. That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for doing the work that you do. And, before we learn a little bit more about Identity and what you're building and some of the resources that you provide, would love for you to share with our audience, what you want us to know about how you've journeyed through your own adoptee identity.
Yeah, I think adoption for me has always been very potent. I've understood adoption from a very young age. I remember being 5, 6 years old struggling with adoption. So from a very early age, I understood that adoption meant somebody placed me for adoption, and I had all the feelings that I think come with that. And so though that's not everybody's story, I think in my particular story, I've always had a deep comprehension of adoption, which I think is unusual maybe for a child. And so I've only felt all the things that come with that. And so, feelings of abandonment, feelings of rejection, wondering what was wrong with me. I was able to be placed for adoption. And so I think my story, though not entirely unique, is somewhat unique in that way, to where, I was a very young person grappling with adoption. And I think how I've navigated is finding space to work through those feelings. I think it comes in seasons and it comes in waves. There was an element of my identity that was racial that I had to figure out, being a transracial adoptee. So there was that journey. And I feel like, to summarize, maybe to say it a little bit clearer, I feel like how I found my identity has been in seasons. And first it was racial identity, figuring that. And then it was kind of grief and loss. And then it was finding myself. And I think the finding myself journey is the one that I'm actually still on and still journeying through.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you said that, because, when people look at entrepreneurs like you who have successfully built a company, who come with this lived experience background, they're like, yeah, awesome. He's got it all figured out. He knows, like, he doesn't struggle and doesn't have challenges. Because he's built this company and he has a voice and, a public face for our community. So he's got it all figured out. Yeah. But you're saying you don't, right? And what you are highlighting for our audience right now is that it is a lifelong journey. Yeah. Every phase of life, something comes up that we do need to process and work through. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's not as hard. Yeah. Sometimes we do it more alone, and sometimes we need a lot of community around us. And it's just being an adoptee, being a foster is something that just never goes away. And so I really appreciate you saying that, especially
Yeah.
for people that are just starting to unpack what this means for them.
And I think if anything, maybe my work should be a symbol of how much I struggle. You know what I mean? I think that would be a better, I was doing another interview recently, and I compared like how I've always done entrepreneurship to art. Like for me, building things that I care about has always been more about an expression of self than it has been like this big economic thing. Like I've had to learn how to build companies in an economic way. Like that's always been the hard
Mm,
stuff for me because
yeah.
I'm actually really, really interested in just doing stuff that's interesting to me that I care about. And so for me, identity is much more of an expression of self. Like and all the things we do, you can even find little bits of my story. You can find bits of the story of the people that I'm close with. You can see the influences. I'm so close to adoptees and people that use our stuff that it's like everything that we do comes from I think, such a interestingly authentic place. And that's not to like brag on our company at all, but it's more so just like this is such an expression for me. It's not just a company. Yeah, obviously we need to do that to keep it alive, but identity has always been an expression of some of my most inner pain, and just reformatting it into something that I think changes the experience for other adoptees.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And you and I are very aligned there. Like that is how I'm building the inclusion initiative as
Yeah,
well. It's my expression of myself and
yeah,
what I needed as a younger version of me too. And
absolutely,
we're trying to make the experience better for all involved in the ecosystem, but
absolutely.
especially adoptees and
Yeah,
fosters.
yeah,
There's a lot behind your story. You have a very rich story. You are still very involved with your adoptive family.
yeah.
You've grown your own family on top of this company, and you talk a lot in the resources and content that you provide about, well, identity and how it's connected to grief and loss as well. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think grief and loss is one of these concepts in adoption that can be a little bit hard for people to understand, especially outside in, right? People who may listen to this podcast may be more familiar with adoption, but if they're not, and people from in the outside world that aren't connected to the adoption world tend to struggle with the idea of grief and loss connected to adoption. Because you would think, or in their minds, they would think that adoption is almost the solving of loss, right? So a child does not have a family, and now that is solved. So loss is now eradicated. When I think that loss is such a crucial part of adoption, and it's kind of almost at the center of adoption, that grief follows in one shape or form, no matter what. And that can be really hard for people to comprehend. And it can even feel, I think, sad and disturbing for people to hear at times. But I personally like to think about it as liberating. I think that anybody who has lost somebody, let's just say a family or a friend,
Yeah.
the worst thing that they've maybe experienced is people trying to get them to get over it, or trying to make them happy instead of thinking about it, or trying to push them to forget about it, right? The thing that they really wanted to do was sit in it and work through it. And so I think when we recognize grief and loss and adoption, it's a very liberating thing, not only for adoptees, but really for adoptive parents as well, because birth parents are often the people they fear the most. And so the way that I think these two things are really connected is that your identity is how you view yourself, it's how you project yourself as well. And so a lot of times adoptees who do not get the opportunity to process any of their loss or grief in childhood tend to have warped and mixed views of themselves and their identity as they enter into adulthood, which can lead to a lot of different challenges. It can lead to identity challenges, so really
Mhm.
confused about yourself, maybe that becoming a terrifying part of your life, so you can't understand yourself. And then it can also just lead to, I think, a lot of confusion about who you are, what you value, where you get your looks from. And so I think that the way that these two are so connected is that without the grief and loss, without processing it, without space for it, it becomes very hard for you to find your identity, find a full picture of yourself, because the thing that you've lost, your birth family, whether by force, whether rightfully, whether wrongfully, no matter how the separation happened, you actually need to go through that process to find who you are on the other side. And so I find these two things are very interconnected in all the work that we do.
Wow. It is a lot to really unpack. And
Yeah.
when you think and process through what all you're saying, I mean, you're talking about like such like multiple facets of loss that honestly, you know, yes, as adoptees, but you know, a lot of fosters especially go through this repeated experience of loss. Like we all have that traumatic loss of being separated by from our birth families.
Yes.
And then that loss of our initial identity and background and heritage, all of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then fosters that are placed into home after home after home after home. There's adoptees where that happens too. I had 2 broken adoptions that happened to me too. And when you repeatedly experience these losses, I mean, you become so numb.
Yes. Loss also makes you loss like that. So repeated loss starts to make you question, what is it about you?
Yeah.
And that's a really difficult thing for a child to start thinking about because it starts to become a part of how they think about themselves.
Yeah. And to your point, it messes with their sense of identity.
Yes.
And then they can't grapple with it. Yeah.
Well, that's how they go into all their other relationships.
Yes. It impacts every facet of their lives. And what I was saying, right, was, you know, when you start to become numb to that loss and then you don't properly grieve.
Yeah.
And then it builds up. And then all of a sudden, right, one day you have to reckon with it. Sometimes that's when you start building a company and hard things come up and you're like, why is this so hard? For a lot of people, it starts showing up when they're entering these really adult, independent public spaces like school, like the workplace, like their community centers, whatever that looks like, you know. And then for a lot of folks that are fortunate enough to have this opportunity, right, it starts to show up when they build families.
Yeah.
And then talk about complexities of identity and then having to process in real time grief, identity, and loss, all that trifecta all at once. And so how do you help in the broader ecosystem not only understand this, but then have the tools to navigate this?
Yeah, I tend to like to frame these conversations around like, this is how you love this child well. And I think how we frame these conversations with prospective and adoptive parents matters a ton. And it's the thing that I often see gets missed the most is that we have to frame these things as if we believe that these parents want to do the best thing they can. And I think sometimes in adoption, because adoption is so complex, because it has so many different sides, we want to be as hard as we can, as fast as we can. But I tend to find that what adoptive parents come to the table with is a lot of brokenness most of the time. And so a lot of adoptive parents come to the table, whether it be through infertility, whether it be, just wanting to build a family and not been able to for years, maybe even just choosing that this is the way they're going to build their family and having gone through maybe years of waiting to be matched, right? So all these things kind of enter the table when people are entering in the adoption. And how they get introduced to these ideas starts to really matter because it either becomes something that they ignore or it becomes something that they really take on as like, this is how I'm going to do this the best way possible. Like, this is how I'm going to be the best parent. And so we like to frame a lot of things around like, this is how you're going to be the best parent you can be. Because my belief is that that's what most people are coming to the table with, the intention of doing. Does it always happen? No, right? And we see that from probably the stories that you're going to hear on here and the many other stories you can find out there. You can find that in my story as well. But I like to start on that page for parents because I want parents to believe that we're on their side, and that if they follow the stuff that we suggest, if they walk with us in this journey, and that they take in all the different information and resources and tools that we provide, that their child will have a better experience. And that's something that I think is really inevitable. I mean, I think so many of us could only dream of having these kinds of conversations with our adoptive parents as children, being able to talk about the thoughts that we're having in our head. Some of us could only dream of having people that look like us be in our community. We know that some of this stuff will inevitably be helpful. And so I like to start on that base with parents. And I think that it's important that when we're introducing adoptive parents, foster parents to this new idea of thinking about it, that they understand how beneficial it could be to their relationship with their child.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that gets a lot of people excited, right? Learning can be daunting, right? I don't want to go to school. You know what I mean? Like if you asked me to go to school right now, I'd be like, no. You know what I mean? Like if you asked me to sign up for a grad school class or go back to undergrad, I'd be like, no. Right. So there's also an element of learning in this way that has to be engaging and fun, and things like that. And so I think a lot about those. I think about multiple modes of learning, and I think about how can we convey really deeply important things in ways that are really accessible and attainable, in ways that you're going to really remember them. And I think that really makes a world of a difference for adoptees, because too many of these, not to ramble, but too many of these adoptive parents, like they're getting all these different resources. They're getting all these different books, suggestions, and all these things, and they're like 200-300-page books, but they just brought home an infant that's screaming, every 2 hours. And so they're not reading them, like they're not taking them in, and it's going to take them years to get some of the information that they really need today, or steps that they need to take today. Or by the time they would have the time to read it, they're lost. They're in like storage. They've moved. You know what I mean? And so you have to actually, I think, in adoptive and foster parent education, also get really creative and innovative about how do you create stuff that's really accessible to read quickly, gives parents immediate tips, and how do you walk parents down the line to deeper resources. So instead of thinking about giving them a 300-page book that's going to tell them everything they need to know, think about giving them one resource that helps them through today and walking them down the line through the resources as the child inevitably gets older, and this tool set you need is different.
Yeah, you're on the journey with them.
On the journey. And that's something that I found is a really big missing component in post-placement support, is that, you get a lot in the beginning, and every year you see the number of resources go down. You see the connection go down. And that makes sense in terms of a model, right? Adoption works in a model where more kids are going to get placed, and then the new parents are going to get those resources.
Yep.
It does not help for the longevity of the success of the adoptee or the adoptive family, though.
No, and it's opposite of the need, because as the child grows up, they need more. The parents need, the problems become more complex.
Yes.
So it's so backwards.
Yeah, most of the time, adoptive parents, especially if we think about infant adoption, it's likely that you actually don't need anything for like the first 2 years, and then you need a lot from like 3 to 18.
Yeah. Well, besides the basics of
right, besides the basics, right? But like, you know what I mean? Trying to go to an adoption support group when your kid's an infant is like much less meaningful than when they're like 6 and they've started to like get upset and angry and confused about adoption. Like that's a whole different journey, where I think that's actually where some of the more crucial resources are needed.
Right. But then to your point, like by that crucial age, the resources have stopped. They're gone.
Yeah, exactly.
And they're no longer connected to that community. They're kind of fending on their own, which is not helpful to anybody.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
I want to go back to what you said a little bit ago. All parents we will, we'll give all parents the benefit of the doubt that they go into this process with the best intentions.
Right.
The best.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's great.
Yeah.
But the intentions are not enough.
Absolutely.
It's just the starting point.
100%.
And how do you get parents past that really hard truth that intentions are the starting point, and no matter how good your intentions are, if you don't do the work leading up to the success of helping your child adjust and thrive, when the intentions are they're really kind of meaningless without the action. So how do you get parents there?
I think you keep making it more and more easier to do the better thing than the wrong thing. And so I think we convey this through our resource as well, like whether it's the content or the books. I think this message gets conveyed, and parents start to see that, oh, like it's not just enough for me to understand this, like I have to put action behind it. And that's why we do a lot of like breakdowns of like, here's the best things to do. But I'm personally finding that on an even deeper note, like some of the stuff that I'm working on right now is like, it's actually not even enough to tell them the actions and send them to do the actions. A lot of times parents actually need like frameworks for these things.
Yeah.
Right. And so I'm finding that most people that transracially adopt today, like their standard training is going to tell them that they need to have conversations about race. Their standard training is going to tell them that that child should not be the only person of color in their community. Right. So that's becoming a kind of a universal of transracial adoption. But the parents have that in their mind, the intention that you're talking about, but they have no clue how to take it into action. And so I'm finding right now that, and the stuff that I'm working on right now is all about how do we make that very actionable. And that's still a very big bridge in adoption and foster care to cross. And some of it gets solved through these parents being in community with people that look like their child. Like that's why that's always the biggest suggestion for transracial adoption, because a lot of the hurdles, a lot of the conversations, your community will have them. Like if you're really ingrained, you can really kind of get through a lot that way. But there are many times that parents actually know that they need to do the thing, want to do the thing, don't know how to do the thing. And so they might either be fumbling through it, or they might be avoiding it out of fear or afraid that they're going to do it wrong. And so I think how we take intention to action, at least when it comes to us at Identity, is creating the blueprint for these things. So one thing I'm working on right now is a conversation guide, which is like when your child's from 0 to 5, here's how you frame different conversations.
Yep, love
5
that.
to 12, here's how you frame a teenage years. When it gets harder, here's how you open up conversations and leave that doorway open. And to me, like that is going to be a large part of how me and other people who create in this space actually get people to go from intention to action. Because I do find that largely there's a lot of intention there. And I think we talk, you're saying that too. It's like you see that there's intention, but you also see the lack of action sometimes.
Yeah.
And I am finding that lack of action is coming from fear. And how do we mitigate fear? I think it's that we reduce the things that the barrier to the things that you're afraid of, right? And so if you're afraid of starting the conversation wrong, we'll tell you exactly how to start the conversation.
Yeah, you're removing the unknown.
Yes, exactly.
And that's how you're removing the fear. That's great.
Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing.
If you don't know how to start it, we'll just tell you how to start it. And then if we find that it's not working, we'll come up with something else and work harder. And you know what I mean? It's just, I think that we have to give the framework to adoptive parents. It's a diverse group of people, but it's a big group of dreamers, if that would make sense. How we might think about dreamers is a great way that I would think about a lot of adoptive parents, right? A lot of ideation, a lot of big thoughts, a lot of hope, and a lot of aspiration. But we also know that with dreamers, me and you are dreamers, right? We also know with dreamers, there can also be a lot of air, right? And so you're motivated towards the big thing, which might be becoming a parent, but there's a lot of dream and idealization in the middle of it, and a lot of, this is going to be the thing. And the rubber meeting the road, I find, for a lot of adoptive parents is much, much harder than they expect. Things that I'm finding in this season of working on Identity are a lot about taking the air out, making sure that
they can have a place where they're grounded.
Yeah, the next level of resources and support, because it is happening, and then that only hurts adoptees. I think about that a lot, how much it hurts adoptees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I really want our audience to take away too is that, in working with you and Identity, parents that choose to do so, professionals in the social welfare space that choose to do so, you are literally coming to them without judgment. Yep. Like there's no fear of judgment coming into your space. Like the whole entire point and goal is that you're trying to make the experience better for them, and most importantly for the adoptees and fosters in their lives. Like that's the entire point. So if you're judging them, it's not gonna be effective. So you are not coming from a place of judgment. Absolutely. And I think a lot of parents do struggle with finding support and help because they have that fear of being judged.
Yeah.
And it's a valid fear. That's very valid.
Yeah.
But part of taking on the responsibility of adopting or fostering a child is that it is no longer about you solely.
Yeah.
Like, you need to really get over that fear of judgment and go get the help that you need. And
Excellent.
so seeking out resources like yours, like
Mhm.
mine, is really important. And so I want to highlight a little bit just your journey towards building identity, and I want to say, like, identity is something that, like, companies, organizations should be seeking out to provide to their employees, people that are
Yeah.
looking to be parents or have already become parents of adoptees and fosters. And companies and organizations should be seeking out resources like mine to help the employees in their workforce that are adoptees, that are fosters, and need that additional support, community, whatnot, as they navigate their career journeys, right? And so it is so interesting to me, right, that there are resources like ours, but we're not being sought after. We're not being plugged into these very important key places.
Yeah.
And so I just want to, like, make a plug on the podcast,
Yeah.
especially for your company, where this is just a very easy
Mhm. Yeah.
opportunity to add value as a benefit to employees in your workforce. So if you're a company or organization listening and you have a subset of adoptive parents, of parents who want to foster, of parents doing fertility who do end up also adopting like embryos and sperm. There's a lot of adopting in the ecosystem of parenting.
Yeah.
You need to be thinking about, how can I bring a resource like identity into my workplace as a benefit for my employees? So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox there.
No,
But
that's if you don't mind, I'll add to it because we have seen this in the last year. We have a really wonderful partnership with PepsiCo, who has an adoption and family group ERG, and this is exactly what they are doing and leading by example. And that ERG is run by an adoptee and
fantastic.
has adoptive parents in it. And I think that you're right. Like, there is actually really easy ways for this to happen, and our relationship with Pepsi has only opened my eyes to how we can plug in and provide our resources to families, even in an ERG model, really
Yep.
effectively and really powerfully.
100%. 100%. So tell us a little bit about how you got to building identity, like what led you there.
Yeah. Well, I've always been entrepreneurial, even from high school, having a record label in my parents' basement. And I just always enjoyed, again, it's just kind of whatever I was interested in, I found a way to make it into something bigger. Um, it wasn't always business for me, though. I didn't understand necessarily the financial side about it for a long time.
Yeah.
And so to me, these were just endeavors. And I had a nonprofit that was my first kind of real venture. And that nonprofit, we were connecting kind of young people to local organizations that did whatever it was that they were passionate about. And through that, I talked about adoption for the first time because we did one about adoption and foster care. And that is actually what led me into speaking. And so that was 2018, and I did my first kind of speaking gigs around in for adoption agencies in that year. And then after a couple months of volunteering and sharing, a social worker that I was working with, she kind of pulled me aside afterward and she said, I'm not sure what else you're doing, but you should probably just do this. And I think I was 20 at the time, to be honest. I didn't really have much else going for me. What I mean, I wasn't really doing anything else. And so in 2019, in January 2019, I launched what was Etter Consulting. And that was just me trying to figure it out. I
Yeah.
was just kind of speaking for adoption agencies, trying to figure out where this would go. And for a little over 2 years, I did that. Just kind of gained a name for myself, spoke for adoption agencies, I learned a lot. That's what I was really doing. I was really taking in a lot of information around how adoptive parents were thinking. And then in 2021 is when I started Identity. And what I really wanted to do, and the gap that I was finding, is that no matter where I spoke, parents were asking largely the same questions. And so it was very evident to me that like me coming in yearly or me coming in quarterly was not going to be an effective,
Yeah.
was not going to be an effective help to these parents, right? It was a very easy maybe band-aid. It was very easy kind of like once a year, like,
Almost felt like a check in the box.
yeah, check in the
Yeah.
box, you know what I mean? But it wasn't even what the parents wanted, you know what I mean? The parents didn't really want to check in the box because they still had to deal with like 11 months of, challenges and questions and insecurities and all these things that were happening. And so me coming in for 1 month didn't help them that much. And so I really seeing this gap, not only in transracial adoption, but pretty much all types of adoption. I was like, why don't I try and change how post-placement support is done? And when we started Identity, it was actually based around taking post-placement support and turning it into all done from your phone. So where you had all your resources on the go. That was a way too techie model to try to introduce to child welfare at the time. And I learned that very quickly. But it did kind of lead us around to where we're at now, which is where we integrate kind of both physical and digital products, and online community to help parents throughout their parenting journey. And so it's been a long road. It's been a road marked by a lot of learning, a lot of spending time with adoption agencies and parents, and a lot of failing. I mean, I would say this is a very difficult field. And maybe with me, but I find it to be very difficult because the avenues to money are also different and complex. And yeah, I mean, I learned a lot from watching other people get it wrong, to be honest. Like I learned a lot from what other people had done before me. And so that's always helpful. It's been a journey that's been marked by like really a lot of perseverance, because there's been a lot of times that I really should have probably said no and been done. And should have done something else when it came just like straight money wise. But I'm really glad that I didn't really care and kept going, because I think if it would have been about even a livable wage, I wouldn't have made it this far. Like there were times where like, I thought I was going to be evicted for how little money I had trying to build Identity. And so I think that if you can really learn to provide value really well in this space, you can find your way to the model that keeps it sustainable. It takes a lot of time and perseverance, and it takes a lot of understanding how to speak with these people and provide value in the right way. But I'm really glad that I found that avenue and that I went through so many years of making next to nothing. You know what I mean? I think for the 6-7 years I've been in this space, there's only been 1 year that I've paid myself. And so people largely underestimate, I think, probably the dedication that it takes and the time it takes to really start making this work and to really find the right avenue. But I find it to be worth it.
Yeah. And I appreciate so much that you did persevere, because it is a thankless road, really, until all of a sudden, right, you're recognized as a national voice, blah, 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 but it takes so long to get there, and people don't see that.
Right.
And people don't know to appreciate that because they're not on the path with you. And I will say too, like it is a mirror, right, of our child welfare system. Of what is valued, what is funded, what is resourced, right? You are an adoptee who has been through the system trying to make the experience better for adoptees and fosters, ultimately by supporting the parents.
Absolutely.
You would think that would be a tremendously, like, you would think people would throw money at you for that.
Right.
And the fact that they're not, right? But then you see who is getting a large chunk of funding, which are the institutions.
Yeah.
Right. And so it is a mirror of the system. And so I appreciate you calling out just the journey and the perseverance that it takes, because there are quite a few of us with this lived experience trying to do this work.
Yeah.
And you have shown that there's light. There's a path forward, but it's a hard, like, you have to be dedicated to the hard road.
Absolutely.
But luckily, as adoptees and fosters, we're used to that.
Yes. And I would encourage,
perseverance is our middle name. Yeah.
absolutely. And I would encourage people who want to do this work to not look for the recognition. I think that is where I see people go wrong, where I've gone wrong. And I think that's where we start to lose anyway. And so I think if you're going to do it, do it for either the love of the game or because or
Because it's your calling.
yeah, because it's your calling, maybe
Yeah.
because you understand something or you have something valuable that is going to be, what I mean? I see a lot of times people get into this space and they're really upset that money hasn't come to them or gone to them. And I noticed it very early, and it's just a recipe for disaster. You have to do this one for yourself first, and then find your way to whatever the financial thing might be. If your expectation is to create with a financial end goal, it's probably going to take longer, first of all. And then it's also probably not going to work because people just don't, this field especially, people just don't pay up front. And so all your value is on the back end. And so I just would encourage people to that, because I think I see that a lot, people wishing that money was going to them and going to them. But the hard thing about this field is that it's just not going to. And you have to learn the game well enough to know even how to get the money. Like
and not that it shouldn't go to them. It's it's not yet.
Well, and sometimes it shouldn't go to you. Like sometimes you're not good enough yet. And it's also valuable to learn that. It's valuable to learn that, like, there becomes a skill and a craft of teaching and portraying that you have to get up to. And there were months that I spent just literally reading financial reports, like literally reading how government was sending money down to states, how the states were sending it down to agency. And when I find people online that have like started like a month ago and they're already upset, I'm like, you've already lost the sauce. You've already kind of gone off the path. And there's so much more down the line for you if you had a different objective.
Yeah, because it's bigger than you. It really is bigger than you.
Yeah,
you're like trying to change an entire movement, an entire ecosystem. I mean, it takes a force of us, and it takes time, like anything. So like any kind of movement, like racial justice, and we've been fighting that for how long now?
Exactly.
It takes time. And so I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and insight as a founder of a company that is really doing really important work in this space. Would love for you to share with the audience, like, what is a key takeaway that you hope the audience gets from this conversation?
Key takeaway I hope people get from this conversation. Well, one, I hope that that you're hopeful about the future of adoption education, because whether you're an adoptee, adoptive parent, or foster alum, the education part of adoption and fostering is something that needs to be changed, needs to be worked on. And I hope that you're excited that we're doing that and that many other people are doing that, because that is day one for many of these people, is the resources that they get, the way they go through training. That's going to be the basis of how they view, most of the time, the entire journey. It gets really hard to change their mind after that's their base, because they already paid the agency, they already trust the agency, or the agency is paying them. And so I hope that's exciting to you, that there's now, I think we're at 12 or 11 agencies that are doing things differently by using our resources. And I think there's many more on the way. The second thing that I would hope my story conveys is that you can do it. Is that if there is a part of this that you want to do, if there is something here that you think you can add value to, I hope that you believe that it is possible for you. I personally think this is a huge opportunity for a lot of people. And I hope that we convey that more and more. I hope that as we grow, we're able to hire more and more adoptees to bring amazing different resources and talents. But there are so many needs in like kid stuff. There's so many needs in training and books. There's so many needs in content. There's a ton of needs in content. Somebody could really capitalize in content. And so there's just so many needs right now that I hope that if you have something that's ideating, that you really feel passionate about, that you feel like it's really possible for you. Because I think it is, and I think now is one of the times. There's not going to be a lot of times like this, and there hasn't historically been a lot of times like this in adoption. And so I hope that those of us who are creative, who really want to do it, really get out there and get after it. And I hope that this encouraged you to do that.
Thanks, Isaac. It's encouraging me because, as you know, I started this about 1.5 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's so nice to hear just from someone that's been there, is doing it still, and is growing and thriving. So thank you for sharing that with our audience.
Yeah, 100%.
So are you ready to pivot to our rapid fire questions?
Let's rapid fire.
Okay. Yeah, this should be fun. All right, let's go. Favorite food?
Favorite food? I'm really into Asian food, to be honest. And so
Me too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've been spending a lot of time in Portland, and so I'm going to go again in a month or two to hang out with some adoptees and just spend time there. And I always eat a bunch of different food there. And so Japanese food a lot, Korean food a lot.
Yum. Yes. Awesome. So what is your superpower as an adoptee?
Ooh, as an adoptee. I think maybe my superpower is like profound awareness. Like just like my superpower might just be just like so conscious of all the different conflicting feelings, which makes my personal life hell. But I think it is a superpower of mine to have just such an awareness of all the different ways that adoption impacts me and my thinking. It makes me able, I think, to connect with adoptees well, and then obviously do this work.
Yeah. There's a lot of truth in that.
No.
What did you dream of doing when you were a kid besides your own record label?
Yeah, I was really big into music, and so I always wanted to be a musician, or I wanted to be a songwriter, or to find and manage bands. And so, yeah, music was definitely my first love.
Oh, nice. Well, maybe you can start a record label for adoptees. That'd be cool.
Who knows? It could happen.
Does that record label still exist?
No, I was 15. I was 15. It barely existed then.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, okay. Yeah. What's one thing on your bucket list?
One thing on my bucket list. I think just to travel more, just in general. I don't know if that's a good bucket list item, but it's just like,
yes,
I've done a lot for the last 5 years. I've done pretty much only work travel. I've not really traveled personally. So I would like to do a couple personal things.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. And then, you've shared advice already, but apart from what you've already shared, what's a general piece of advice that you want to share with our entire audience?
General piece of advice. I don't know. Maybe just here's my advice. I think I have it now. What I've found over the last pretty much 2 years of identity, because identity has been around for about 3 years, is that the first year I thought it was all about the business. And as the business was failing more and more, I realized that it wasn't about the business, that it was about me. And I wish that more people, and my advice to more people, would be to realize how in the way of anything that they want, they themselves are. Yeah. And so what I found personally, and at least I'll just speak from my experience, is that the more I worked through my own issues, the clearer I got about all the other stuff, the better all the other stuff became. The less I just took away my desire to maybe be seen or to be recognized, the more I just took away and I got down to some of the roots issues of myself, the things that I was struggling with, the pain that I was internalizing, the better everything else got, because you have to just be, you have to get out of your own way. And I love the book, The Mountain Is You. I just reread it for the second time, and I've read pieces of it throughout the last 2 years on and off, but I read it for the full thing again for the second time. And it always reiterates to me that the only thing standing in my way of happiness and success is me. And so I hope for adoptees that we spend a lot of time getting out of our own way. And it doesn't have to be about business. It can just be about life and being happy and being in the moment and not fearing loss all the time. And we're just in our own way. And it's not our fault, but it is our responsibility. And so we have to find a way through. We have to find a way over. And my only advice would be just to conquer the mountain. Maybe I gave away a lot of advice. I don't know, but just conquer the mountain.
No, I love that. I love that. And you're really saying, like, empower yourself.
Yeah.
Don't be stuck in the circumstance that you were put in. Just empower yourself. You can do it. And that's awesome. That's beautiful.
With yourself. And it's been so hard for me. Like I can convey that, I try to share that in my content so people that see it in a more honest way, but it's been so hard for me to get there. It's been so hard for me to feel happiness or stay in the moment or not always be thinking about the next thing. And so, find the moment, find what it is inside of you that's broken and that's maybe been broken by adoption and find ways to heal it in small ways and then big ways.
Thank you, Isaac. Thanks so much for being here today. Thanks for sharing like everything that you've shared and your insight, your wisdom, your experience, both as a founder and also as an adoptee. And if you want to get in touch with Isaac, you can find him at identitylearning.co and issacetter.com. Follow him, get in touch, hire him, hire his company. He has a lot of educational courses and workbooks and all this kind of stuff. So really, check it out and become a part of that ecosystem. Yes. And everything to find Isaac and get in touch with him will also be in our show notes. Folks, if you enjoyed the show, if you enjoyed this conversation, please like, follow, and share our show. Yes. And we cannot wait to see you next time. For now, take care. Bye, everybody.
See you guys.
I hope you enjoyed the show. Please subscribe, share, and follow us. Check out our show notes to know where to find us on social. And our website is theinclusioninitiative.com. If you're an adoptee of color or a foster care alum and you want to join our professional community, it's free, by the way. Hit me up via DM or you can find our email in the show notes. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.